unfortunately, it's not that easy to set up. I've run into many problems over the years to set this up. Okay. The only way to do that is to have something local machine set up in one of the labs. But then it's a bit impractical to stay doing this with people coming in and out at the moment, especially. So we'll have to do with a sort of sampled exercise, if we like. Now, the idea, blah, 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 blah. Of course, it always helps to read about this topic. I mean, the more you read about these things, the better it is. Right? Mela, I am in fact going to split this up. I'm going to split this up. So first I'm going to start with this. And then I'm going to move on to the actual presentation. And then we're going to come back to our assignment. All right, so that's why I thought this really fit in well with our lesson today. Okay, to start off with, we've got a background of a person. Okay, so the assignment is based basically on trying to guess the password of this girl, some woman, whatever, this girl, Jackie. Okay, and here we've got a bit of background information about Jackie. All right, so this is just information. Obviously, it's a background to her, right? That we need to use to try and guess, hopefully, this password. Okay. So, well, boiling it down as an assignment, that's what it is. All right. So how we're going to see. But first, I have to make a detour on our lesson. Right? And then in the lesson, I'm going to stop and come back to this. All right, so far, anything you want to comment or ask? Yeah. Okay. Mala. So last time we were talking, we introduced the subject, if you recall, right? So last time what did we do? We introduced the subject. We talked about the security features, right, and different types of attacks, and a bit of terminology here and there, risk analysis, also a small insight into security models. Okay, so these were all things that we mentioned in the introduction chapter. Now let's look at this one. So identification and authentication. So identification and authentication, what do you think we're dealing with over here primarily? So sorry?
Identifying the user and identifying if the user is the user that should be actually be giving authorization to do certain things.
Okay. Yeah, Alex, you mentioned passwords, if I heard correctly. Yes.
Sorry, I got a bit lost. I don't know why. I was convinced that this was I got confused with the course. I was convinced that this was the introduction to information security. I don't know why. It's
no, it's okay.
I was super confused. So we were talking about the assignments. I was talking about the assignment that he gave us for that one. So I don't know if I have to do that assignment now, since I don't know if I'm following that course.
You still have to do that assignment.
I still have to do that assignment. Okay.
You still have to do
that. But I thought that assignment was your assignment. Sorry.
In fact, the other assignment I wrote it also, because I wrote it, and for the full timers I do that assignment and the one of architecture. So I discuss it with Jeremy, and then I issue the assignment. So they're all my assignments. If you like the 3 assignments you have, they're all mine.
But I see. But I don't know if I'm following that course. That's the problem. So I worked on that assignment, so I don't know if I need to present it. That's what I.
Yes, you need, because with Jeremy you will be.
I will be doing introduction to information security with Jeremy.
Yes.
Okay, now
because the way it is it is split up in the part-time. You've got, for example, the first 5 weeks doing architecture, and then the next 5 weeks, for example, doing information security with Jeremy. But
Okay,
the
I see.
assignments are very open. So like this, as I mentioned before, you don't have to stay doing them in Christmas. You don't have to stay pushing everything.
I see.
So even if you didn't actually start the material with Jeremy, you can still look it up. There are still is general knowledge basically. That's what.
I sorry. Now it's all it all. I got that's why I got confused. Sorry. I really apologize.
Yes, no problem. And if the assignment of information security is, I mean, this Facebook thing is something which happened recently, so it's something topical that we stay reading about.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully,
So that's so I was talking about that. So that's why I thought.
I know. No problem. Mela, don't worry. There's still some work to do here. Don't worry about that also. Yeah.
Okay.
Mela, okay, so basically, yes, we are talking about how we're going to know with whom we are talking about. Okay, if I am talking to John, Tom, Mary, whatever, I need to know that who the person is over there. But I also need to confirm that it is actually that person and not someone else who pretends to be, obviously, Tom, Dick, or Harry, right? So we are sort of looking into these things, right? And this is a very basic form of basically recognizing for the computer to recognize with whom someone, the computer, it is talking. So on, like to use he, but anyway. Mela, let us compare two systems. Nowadays, this I have to arrange the statement every time I forget to arrange it because the email system has changed basically. But if we were to compare a traditional login system, so you've got a password and you've got a username, okay? With the logging system we use for internet banking, I'm pretty sure you have an internet banking system. What makes the internet banking system more secure? What do you think?
Usually,
Hopefully you recognize the keys.
usually uses
The
a.
use of one-time pass. Sorry.
Repeat as I did that there.
And the use of one-time passwords.
Use of one-time passwords. What do you use for the one-time passwords?
The key, whether it's an app or a separate key, which is actually physical and you can hold on to.
Yes. Okay. So if we compare the two systems, one is a notable difference is the fact that with the internet banking system, you've got this little gadget, you've got this little key running around to be used. Of course, I know that nowadays we're shifting everything to the mobile, right? So you can have the mobile apps, you can have the keys with the mobiles, all right? So there are all these things. But this outlines something important in our context, right? Now, if we move one step back, first of all, this is the basic idea of authentication. So we've got who we are, establishing our identity, versus how do I know that you are who you say you are? And there we are authenticating that identity, right? We are making sure that if it is Tom, then it is really Tom over there, okay? And this is the system, the traditional system of having a username and a password, right? Now, the level of security is determined by these three properties, this nice little triangle that you see over here. Something you have, something you are, something you know. And this is what distinguishes the sort of traditional logging system I mentioned versus the internet banking logging system, right? Because when we put in the three things, our system becomes more secure, right? So, in fact, this was traditionally called two-factor and three-factor authentication. Nowadays, this term factor authentication is being used for the codes we receive, the SMSs, So it's taken a bit of a different tangent to what it was originally intended, right? So when we're talking about a password in the login system only, there is something you are, because the username is identifying yourself, and something that you know, which is the password. So it's a two-factor authentication. When we are putting in a token, a mobile something, okay, we are also introducing another layer, something that you have. So like that, it becomes something more secure. We've got a three-layer system, right? And just to take some simple examples, even if we look at a bank card, something that you are will be the name with whom that bank card will be registered, right? It's registered in your name. Something that you have will be the actual card, so physically you have a card, and something that you know will be the PIN number, which is equivalent, of course, to your password, right? So that is again a three-factor system there. And well, the equivalent will be the internet banking system. This here I've kept the old screenshots. I know that this is an old screenshot, so I don't know whether you with HSBC, BOV, or some other bank, more or less, even if they change the interface, we are always entering these three pieces of information. Somewhere, somehow, we have to put in our username or an ID number. For example, BOV, you don't put in a username, you have a number. Each user has a number, so you've got your own number. In the case of HSBC, there is a username. All right, so obviously different banks will use different systems. Previously, in the case of HSBC, they used to ask us for a password over here. And then we used to use the token to put in a code. Now they've removed this, and in a way, the password is still being done, but it's being done directly on the token itself. The same with BOV. Alright, BOV, you've got to put in your PIN number on the actual token device. Alright? So even if the scenario changes, okay, these are a bit more recent. Even if the scenario changes, ultimately we are still asking for three things. Right? Something we are, something we know, something we have. And that makes it, because of the three properties, right? It makes it more secure. Right? And now, as we've seen in many places, I mean email, Facebook, and well, God knows what other places you have, right? Many places are using this extra authentication method, right, of sending SMSs, sending one-time codes, passwords to the mobile phone or whatever, right, to increase the level of security. Now, have a look at this. Okay, so here we've got a company policy. So suppose we've got a company policy in terms of passwords, and this company decided to set these three rules, right? So each password must be at least 10 characters long. Passwords need to be changed every fortnight, every 2 weeks, and passwords must be a mixture of alphanumeric characters. Alright? Alphanumeric traditionally means letters, small, capital, and numbers. Okay? In other cases, because we find when you say reading articles, you will find both things. Alphanumeric can also mean any other symbol on the keyboard. Right? So, I don't know, plus, minus, brackets, whatever symbol there is. For all intents and purposes, in our case, we can consider them to be anything that we have on the keyboard for this particular example. Right? So what are we saying here? We're saying that this company insists that the users will change their passwords every 2 weeks. They must be at least 10 characters long, and they have to be a mix of everything they find. They cannot be only small. They have to be a mixture. Now, in your opinion, what do you think? Is this a secure system? Would you do anything different? Is there something that maybe you don't like, you would change? What do you think?
Sounds very secure. to be honest.
Okay. Is there anything you would change?
Oh,
Wouldn't make it so aggressive every fortnight because speaking from experience from users that I work with, they usually tend to use the same password, but in like different symbols, different letters, and that is pretty much just changing the password but keeping the same password. Basically.
Just changing a small part of it, just changing a character.
So doing it every fortnight won't give them that initiative to actually try something different because they'll be like, this again. There's that thing, I guess. It is secure, but users will probably abuse that as well in a different way.
So what would you do differently over here?
At least I just wouldn't do it as that that aggressively. Not every fortnight, maybe every month, maybe every 3.
Okay. Yeah, Alex, is there something you would change from there?
I mean, I agree with Gary that it's a very tends to be. I mean, this changing every fortnight might come into the opposite. Have the opposite effect. Maybe some of the users would forget their passwords, so
Yes.
they will be like, I cannot get into my system, so they would get to go back to IT administrator, and they'll send another link, change another again the password, and so
Yes.
that's the only thing I would say.
So we're going to get back to this very soon. But both of you have sort of what you've said, and you've really hit it well, basically, because we have to be careful. I mean, if we had to look at the three things separately, the three of them are very secure. They make a lot of sense in terms of security. I mean, having a password which is at least 10 characters long is very good. Even by our standards today, it is very good, right? So it is a good length, definitely. Having passwords which are a mixture of a lot of symbols is something which we always hope for. So it is, again, something very good. And theoretically, if you are changing your passwords very frequently, that is a strength in terms of security. But then we get to the question of how feasible is it? Is it going to be, is it in a way too strong that we're going to end up creating other problems, like you mentioned, right? I mean, both of you mentioned two good issues, whether it's a question of an inconvenience of always resetting because of forgetting passwords, whether you're just going to end up with refilled passwords because you're going to stay adding or editing the previous password. We're still, and unfortunately, this is something that we find a lot and a lot, right? Where still is that you get a lot of people who end up writing them down. Okay? Back when I used to work at the factory, you used to walk through the corridor and on the monitors, you see a lot of post-it notes with different passwords for different applications, which is really completely against the whole principle of having a password. So I'm sure you've seen something similar, so it's nothing new. Uh, But so, what's the point of doing something very secure? And then you have people, compromising everything and writing it down. So, might as well not do it so tight, not do it so secure. Yeah, right? Um, and this also ties in with what we mentioned last time on how important it is to train people. I mean, education will always remain a key element in security. It is important to have education, right, and to be able to teach our employees. We're going to get back to this, but a bit later. Yes, sir. Let's move on because we've got a bit of more work to do now. Starting off with a password file. Here we're just mentioning, if we're mentioning passwords and we've obviously got this checking to grant us access, somewhere there's going to be a file which somehow is used to grant access. So traditionally, this is the password file, right? So your operating system or whatever system you're logging into will have a database basically where you're going to have the passwords. Okay? The password should be indexed by some form, like to a username most of the times, and then quite simply. So this again, it is not what we are meant to have today. This is just the general concept, right? So as a user will log into the system, type in the password, the database is searched for that username, and the password is checked. If they match, access is granted. If they don't match, access is not granted. Right? So it's a very simple procedure. Well, hackers, you've heard about them. Even last time we've mentioned them. We had a nice discussion at the end on whether we think white hat hacker actually exists. We will skip this part, all right? But obviously, we know that there are different people who claim to be at least under different hats. So, Mela, we need to do a small exercise now. Okay? So, suppose, for whatever reason now, whatever reason, you want to obtain your boss's password. All right? I don't know. It could be that your boss didn't grant you a leave that you needed to take, or you were meant to be on leave and then he decided to remove it. Anyway, whatever the reason is, okay, or there is an appraisal or anything, we have to see how would you go about this, right? So how would you go about trying to obtain this boss's password? Now, obviously, here is where let me get up a sketchpad to jot down some notes. You have to do a bit of imagination. I'm going to leave this.
We will
No,
need to do it in a secret way or in a.
brainstorming out loud. So how would you go about to get your boss's password?
I'll try to
Hmm.
relieve some responsibility off his shoulder. So there maybe he's really busy with some work, and I'd be like, look, I can do that for you, but I need the password to be able to access the system to be that to that for you. So I make your life easier.
Okay, so you're trying to trick him in that case, I would say.
Actually, it's actually sincere wanted to help, and I mean, I know
Okay, let's write sincere, although it doesn't sound so nice as a sincere part, but anyway.
but I mean, it actually happens to my work because sometimes I'm like maybe there's an error. We take an X-ray of a patient. There's a small error in the patient's name or ID, and we need to change the name. And if you need to call every time the boss, so to ask him to change, he is dealing with other patients. So I actually have
It's easier to give you the password.
yes, exactly.
Yes.
It's easier for him to give me the
No,
password.
it happens in many places. Really, I remember many cases. You've got people who are on leave, and something happens. You phone them. They to give them because they need your password. But what are you going to do? Going to stay going back to work, or just give the password over the phone? You just give the password.
Yeah,
No one. No.
it actually happened to me yesterday. I was following the lesson. They called me from work. I need the password because I need to change. So I had to log in. I had to log in through TeamViewer. So I went to them to the computer to not give them the password. So yeah,
You did a good thing. You did a good thing. But many people would just give the password.
I,
But
I
anyway.
I was very much hated for just having to do that, but I had to do that.
More ideas. Yeah, we need more ideas here. We need to fill in the paper and still
Oh
a bit.
really?
Oh, yeah. More ways of trying to obtain this password.
Install.
Use.
Sorry.
Sorry?
Eavesdropping, watch him type the password out and try and guess it from there.
No. Wait, eavesdropping. Right? Yes. So you're watching him. What else?
Maybe installing a keyboard recorder, the type recorder on his machine.
Okay, keylogger.
Keylogger,
Keyloggers.
exactly.
Okay. More ideas, yeah, more ideas.
Ask him his security questions, but as casually as possible. You're not actually getting the password. You're just getting the. You're just attacking him in a different way.
So if his email is open, I can reset the password.
And if you guess that password, probably all of the rest of the passwords are the same.
Yes, you can reset password.
If he forgot to log out onto something, you can actually go in and actually change the
Yes,
password from there.
which happens. I mean, what we're saying, there is nothing which is exaggerated. I mean, many people do not log out of their systems. Okay, so you can find everything. More ideas, yeah, more. We need more.
Also falls under asking security questions, but social engineering in general.
Yes. Social engineering will be not only security, but anything which has to do with the user. In fact, I'm going to write it as answer which general. Let's just write it as knowledge of the user. Okay.
Ask someone close to him if they know the password. Go through his notebooks to see if he has written it down or he's actually do a search on his computer to see if there's a file called passwords. You never know.
You don't need a password file of the operating system. Probably he'll have one himself. Yes. In fact, there are also sometimes there are also sometimes the password generators themselves,
Yeah, that's true.
right? Or storage, like Chrome, for example, or whatever it is. Right? It could be that you can find good passwords over there. And as I don't know, someone mentioned that was you are giving, many people would use the same password for different places. So the chances, if you manage to find one password, there's a very good chance that you're going to be able to use it in other places. Happens. All right, yes.
Yeah, Chrome actually asks you for your Windows password to be able to see the passwords.
Okay.
Watch him type the password while he's logging in the computer.
Okay.
Ask,
For
ask,
mention
ask him.
something
Ask him.
like watching the
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
yes. You're too good in your thoughts. You don't have a lot of the evil thoughts. You're still good over you.
You mean just actually bribing him or?
Yes, so why not? I mean, as an exercise, we can include it. Yes, why not? Okay, so hopefully we don't arrive to those. But whenever I do this exercise, there are quite imaginative answers. So
Kidnap their dog and cat and demand.
Can include kidnap. It is part of it. It depends how bad you want it and what is at stake. Oh, I suppose.
Exact. I mean, yeah, I was thinking more like I didn't want to lose my job, but if losing my job is in the picture, exactly.
Right, you can go to obviously things which are maybe a bit more, you know, heavy duty,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Okay.
Fishing
Well,
as well.
sorry,
Fishing as well.
Yeah, that's a good
fishing,
one.
very good.
It's a really good one.
Unfortunately, or not, that is the more one of the most common problems that we fall for in general. Right, so we've got quite a good selection, right? So, but the way I've written them down, in fact, is on purpose. Why? Because even when we're thinking about this, okay, I'm going to leave out these, you know, the extreme ones. We can leave them a bit out. We've mentioned them, right? We know about them, but let's leave them out for now. The thing is that when we're looking at trying to obtain something like a password, we notice that there are simple things which are relatively simple and which we can do without any particular knowledge. Don't really need to have particular technical knowledge. Right? I mean, tricking him or helping him and then asking for the password to work doesn't require anything. Watching or eavesdropping someone type a password is one of the easiest way of hacking, especially when you have people, and there are a lot of people who type with, for example, one finger. Right? You have someone who types slowly with one finger. I mean, it's incredibly easy to see what that person is typing, right? And so that is also asking security questions. Okay, maybe not that obvious, but it can be done. Social engineering, however, is something which is extremely important for us to consider because, again, it is one of the main ways by which people get attacked, right? So, unfortunately or not, despite year after year, security in security, we preach and we preach and we preach that we shouldn't use passwords which are related to the person, anniversaries, pets, spouses, children, dates, I don't know, sports. All right. Despite all the propaganda that we try to do in this direction, people still keep on using these types of passwords. I mean, the reason being that it's quite obvious, they're easy to remember, which is fair enough,
Excuse my
right?
excuse my ignorance. What is social engineering?
Social engineering is when you are sort of going through the social life of the person, for example, through social media,
Okay.
right? And picking out information from there. So when you have people, anything which is found in a public profile basically can be used against you, putting it simple, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
I prefer to use knowledge of the user because it is not only through social media. Social media, when we are considering strangers, but if you know the person, obviously you don't need to only look in social media. If you're talking to a person day in, day out, you would know his hobbies, you know the person's timetables, how enough pastimes, what they like to do, picnics, whatever. Okay, so
Year of birth.
this, sorry.
Year of birth, which is a very common one.
Yeah, so year of birth, anniversaries, those are not very common things. And unfortunately, to date, these are still the main, they still form part of the main bulk of the passwords that we have. And whenever there is a breach, like there was for LinkedIn, like there was for whatever big company where you have a database of passwords which is sort of released, one of the things that we can do, that is done, in fact, is to see what the passwords were. And in fact, they see that the passwords still follow this traditional personal sort of clinging, right? It is convenient because it is something that you can easily remember, right? But we have to keep in mind that if it is easy to remember, it may be easy for someone to find it out also. So one thing be compromising the other. You did mention other things, writing it down, as we said before. It is done incredibly a lot, right? Sometimes even I sometimes need to write things down because unfortunately today we have so many passwords and locations and pins and whatever that it's not always easy to remember or to distinguish between one and the other. But then there is writing it down in somewhere obvious and then writing it down somewhere not obvious. Alright, so you have to be a bit imaginative if you need to write it down. Unfortunately, however, we find that in many cases, people would just have a diary, and on the diary you would have a nice list of passwords very conveniently grouped together over there, and you can use them. So that is a problem. Asking someone close to him is also somewhat, it may sound stupid, but in fact it is something practical, especially if we're talking a boss. There is a very, very good chance that the secretary knows the password of the boss. Right? So, I mean, even if you don't manage to get it through the boss, you can sort of get it through the other area. You get it through the secretary. Right? So you see which one is the weaker of the two links. Okay? Search on computer for passwords, yes. Right? So those are simple things, which, as again, we don't really need technical knowledge. Right? The middle column, then we start getting into more technical background. So if you need a keylogger is very effective because a keylogger, what's a keylogger? It's a software or a hardware because there are two, right? There's software and there's hardware keyloggers, right? Which basically store every key which is typed on the keyboard. So every keystroke that you do is logged and stored, right? And then sometimes you have to filter out because there will be a lot of keystrokes. You have to filter out and find the passwords from there. Resetting passwords is good also. You need to sort of convince him to reset the password. In a way, you can fake being an IT support, for example. You can pretend to be an IT support and ask for password details also. There's a good chance in the first column, what I didn't mention over here, that there is in fact a good chance that if you ask a person, the person will actually give you the password. Okay? It does happen. Unfortunately, it does happen, right? It could be password changing. Sorry?
But wouldn't, if say you're pretending to be somebody and you ask him for the password, wouldn't that be phishing?
In a way, yes.
Pretending to be an entity? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And phishing obviously is the classical case. That could be, yes, phishing through a telephone call, or phishing through an email link, or phishing through a website. All right? It is the classical case. Right? We didn't mention something like brute forcing it. So brute forcing it, which we're going to mention again now, is the idea of trying out all possible combinations, right? So here, in fact, I'm going to write it down. My spelling is terrible. It's a good thing you did your English already. Brute force. So brute force is when we try every possible combination that we have. If we look at a simple example of a PIN number, brute force is usually working systematically, not randomly. Because randomly will be harder to finish. Okay? So systematically, brute force is working through all possible combinations. For example, if I have a 4-digit PIN number, 0000001, all right? And this I keep on going to 999. And in fact, when we're talking about a 4-digit number, there are only 10,000 possible combinations that can exist. It's from 0000 to 9999. There isn't any other thing. So if you go through all of them, at some point you have to beat the pin at some point, right? And this is what a brute force concept is. The brute force is this idea of working systematically through all the possible combinations that we can have. And it is our number one headache, because whatever we do in security, whatever system we have, we are doing it with brute force in mind. Okay? Because we have to always keep in mind what a brute force attack will do in this case. So brute force is something which will always work, always. It can never fail. It's impossible that it fails because it's trying out all the combinations, right? So a brute force will always work. So it is up to us to try and defend against it, try and limit this. For example, in the case of an APM, you are not allowed to enter the pin more than 3 times. If you enter it more than 3 times incorrectly in 24 hours, your card is taken, which is a simple mechanism to defend against it. Right? So if you want to stay trying 2 combinations every day, you can, but by the time, hopefully, the card will be reported that it has been stolen. Okay? Hopefully. The only problem with brute force, which we keep in mind and use to our advantage, is time. Okay, so brute force will always work. It's impossible it doesn't work. But it's going to be a question of time. How long will it take to do it? Right? And that is our defense mechanism that we have to keep in mind the time frame a brute force attack will take and work within that time frame. Yes. The other things we've mentioned here, well, they were nice to mention, but we'll sort of put them a little bit on the side and keep that out for now. Okay. All right. Mela, let me change back to our presentation. So we've looked at simple things, as we said, right? So we've looked at simple attacks, looking over shoulder, finding a written note, right? To attacks which are more refined. And in fact, we can have a look at these types of attacks. Um, Guessing the person using the personal knowledge of the user, right? So that is the very first thing that we do. Now, when we've got these types of questions, so now, if I go now looking ahead to an exam, it is common that we have a scenario and you have to explain how you would guess the password of this particular person, whoever it may be in the scenario. In this case, you are free to obviously come up with many ideas. We try and avoid, the extreme ones like the ones we did. Those we try and avoid them. But other than those, we can come up with many good ideas, which are perfectly okay and correct. However, these 4 must always be mentioned. Okay, so these 4 ideas, you always have to mention them. You can add to them as many things as you want, but these 4 must always be there. Okay, it is very important to always note them. And it's also important to note the order, because when it comes to passwords, the order in which we move, right, the order in which we sort of attack or approach something is also important. It doesn't make sense to start with something more complicated. So there has to be a sequence. And we'll start off with something simple, okay? And always sort of increase in complexity until we reach what we want, right? So the first approach over here, which we already mentioned, in fact, is to try and guess using the knowledge of the user, right? We've said this, and well, in this topic, we have to say it more than once. Okay, many people give away a lot of information about themselves, right? On social media, they give away a lot of information which the person what we're talking. So this can be used a lot against us. And using the sort of idea that many people base their passwords on something which is related to themselves, we can extract a lot of possible information from there. So that would be the first one, guessing using the knowledge of the user. Now, the next one is called a dictionary search, a dictionary attack. And this, again, I mean, these come out of statistics when people stay analyzing databases of passwords, right? That we have a lot of passwords which are based on a standard dictionary word. I don't know, for example, you want the word computer, right? There are many passwords which are really words, simple words we find in a dictionary: computer, kettle, table, right? There are a lot of these passwords. So a dictionary attack is just taking up a dictionary and running through the different words in the dictionary and comparing them to try and match a password. Okay? That is a simple dictionary attack. Now this can be refined a bit more with the third one, the intelligent searching, because with the intelligent search, what is done is to take the dictionary search and start including different patterns or combinations. For example, you include numbers. I don't know if you have the word computer, for example, the C may be a capital letter, the O may be a zero, right? So intelligent searching is taking the basic dictionary word and complicating it a little bit. Okay? Certain procedures like changing O into 0, L into 1, or the other way around, they are still, by today's standards, not considered to be secure. Right? Although we do them, I know that we do them, and they are done, to a certain point they're not really considered to be secure because it is a known method. In this respect, when it comes to the dictionary or intelligent searching, a bit of an advantage that we may have is when we know languages which are other than English. I mean, the English language is the main language which is targeted by hackers because it is more widespread throughout the world. So that means that a dictionary attack is more feasible for them to do it. When you've got other languages, especially languages which may not be so popular, and you're not talking also about French or Spanish, right? If we're talking about even something like Maltese, for example, it is there's less chance of having a dictionary attack on something like that, right? So maybe it is worth considering that if you're using a particular word, don't use it in English, but use it in another language. It will make it a little bit safer in this respect. The last form over there is the exhaustive search, which is the brute force, right? So in the brute force, as we've said, we're going through all the possible password combinations, one after the other, until we reach the one we want. It will work always. The problem is time, right? And this is also why in the beginning, I told you also that as such, security is a bit of a myth. It doesn't really exist. Okay, so nothing is perfectly secure. We cannot have something which is perfectly secure, right? All right, so far, Manaf, any comments, questions? Easy peasy.
Sometimes you hear like People saying that brute forcing this will take 100,000 years with the faster computer ever. Is that true, or can it be something like that, like cryptography that can get to that, or
It can be. It can be. We're going to come to that very, very soon now because we have to work it out. Hold on a little bit more. When it comes to the technical part, we've got password spoofing, which is basically the idea of fooling a person. Okay, fooling someone, a person, to give them the password, and it can be something which is very simple, like even just asking. Okay, so you can just ask the user. Unfortunately, it can be done, or else we create some fake screen or phishing or whatever it is. Like we mentioned in the exercise, when we could sort of go for the technical options, right? This, well, here you can read a nice article. So here, BBC did a small experiment, right? They went in one of the underground stations in London, I which one, right? And they were asking people whether they would give them, and when they actually asked them for the password, whether they would give them their password in return in exchange for a piece of chocolate. So you give me your password and I give you a piece of chocolate. All right. And well, from the survey they did, more than 70% actually gave them a password. All right. It's up front. We wouldn't know whether the passwords were actually true passwords they use or they still use. Because speaking for myself, I would probably invent a password just to take a piece of chocolate. I would definitely go for that.
it's a good idea?
But well, so it could be. However, when we see, if you were to read the article, that article is somewhat, maybe later you can read it, the types of passwords that there were completely hand in hand with what we have in statistics: bets, anniversaries, dates, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, although it may be that not everything was completely accurate, there is quite a lot of truth in it. That's also the idea that you shouldn't divulge your password no matter what. Right? Recently, I had a bit of an issue with Epic because they wanted me to give them the password I have with them just through an email, and I didn't want to. I found it to be very stupid. But anyway, they kept on insisting, and I had to go to their. Actually, had to stay going to their office. I couldn't work with them by email because they needed this password. Some I cannot understand. And this we're talking about recently. I'm not talking about 10 years ago. Anyway. Phishing, we have a lot of examples. So here I'm pretty sure at some point you've received something either from Nigeria, from well, many other places, right? This is just one of the many phishing examples that I would have received over the years. Okay. Now, obviously, looking at this in this particular phishing example, right? The people who sent it here are pretending to be Gmail and are asking for username, password, etc., which in itself should already be a flag. Unfortunately, not everyone will realize this. Unfortunately, right? It should already flag you that the fact that you are being asked to just send the password in plain text through an email, the something is wrong, like that, right? It shouldn't be something to do. Okay. However, let's suppose you have two persons who receive this email. Person A filled it in with the username, the password, date of birth, location, and sent it a reply. The second person didn't fill it in because the second person was suspected there was something wrong with this, but instead the second person replied, right, with a lot of very angry swear words, okay, to whoever sent this. If I were to tell you that irrespective of what the reply was, the fact that they both replied satisfied the needs of the hacker. Why? Why do you think that is the case? Whether the reply was meaningful or whether it was offensive, for the hacker, it was still what the hacker wanted. But
because
why is that?
they have a database of the victim that gets passed through all the hackers, so they know that is a valid email that can send other
Yes,
they can send other phishing emails to
exactly.
different
The
ones.
main exactly the main aim of the phishing is not the actual content, but to see whether that email address exists or not. And the fact that you reply to it, even if you're just offending them, the fact that you reply to it, to them, it means that that email exists. And once that email exists, it is conveniently plugged and put on a database on the black web, on the dark web, on the black market, right? And it is never removed. You can never remove it. Forget it, forget any filters or unsubscribing, right? The only way to get rid of it is to actually change the email address. There's no other way. Once your email is somewhere there, you cannot remove it. This is also a bit of an issue, in fact, with rules of companies. Some companies prefer not to stay doing automatic reply messages, right? For this reason, because like this, if it's an automatic reply, it would mean it exists, right? So it is a bit of a give and take situation when it comes to these replies. Now, this one was another phishing situation. Just by looking at this paycheck, I know it's a bit small to look at. Can you see something which is wrong? Don't ignore the graphics in the sense that as a graphics, I mean this was going back 11 years, so this was an exact replica of the PayPal page. But if you just look at it like this, is there something that maybe would
There's
attract a bit your attention?
there's no HTTPS, or
There's
maybe
no HTTPS, but at that time HTTPS wasn't used all the time, so
okay.
there's something else.
Going on the IP address and the domain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. If we look at the IP address, right. Yep. Okay. There is, as you can see,
Yeah.
an extra IP here. Now, irrespective of what there is written here, this is the one which counts, even if here there's it in paper. That's irrelevant. This is the first part, which is the one which matters the most. So, in other words, this was a fake site. Now, how many people would know that? Not a lot. Okay? Unfortunately, not a lot. And again, this is why it's always a question of educating people. Education remains a very important key element here, right? This was rather an intelligent phishing site, okay, because the main aim of the phishing site was to take card details of the person. And so that was the main aim here. But once you were to click on the add card, all right, it would pop up an error. But it didn't stop there. So the intelligent part was that once it popped up this error, it automatically directed the user to the actual customer care service of PayPal. Right, so for all intents and purposes, the user would then be dealing with PayPal, and they would actually be dealing with PayPal, right? And it was a nice scam, or nice, okay, not if you were caught in it, but it was an intelligent scam because like this, it would really be transparent to the user. I mean, obviously, eventually PayPal would learn, but it would come at the cost of a few hundred people, right? Uh, and the damage would have been done. Right? So this was one example of many scams that we have to always be careful of. Sometimes it is about a bit tiring, because you spend more time on
Was
being vigilant.
very elegant, must
Mela,
say. The fact that they send you to PayPal, real PayPal.
yes, it was intelligent.
Yeah.
It was nice. Well, nice from that point of view again.
I mean, must respect someone like that.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Hats off. Um, okay, so now we're into something different. Now, I didn't play this, all right? So I don't know if you've ever played it. I won't go into that, all right? Because usually, sometimes I get a group of people who played it, those who hate it, those who love it. So I'm not going into that. However, if we look again closely at the page was again an exact replica of the page of the time, right? So that is not an issue. But if I zoom in a little bit,
I have the one.
you have over here, I don't know how much you can see it from there,
I have the
but
one.
you've got a 1 instead of an L. But you also have a C instead of an O here.
Yeah.
So the World of Warcraft is changed. Again, it's not that easy to notice, especially when all the interface remained exactly the same. Okay, and this is another one. Exactly the same interface. The URL is slightly different. What's wrong with this URL?
Is it the .NET?
No, that was one of the servers they had.
Is the spelling.
What's wrong with the spelling?
There's an R.
Yes, there's an R. At first glance, you don't realize, but then when you start looking at it,
Yeah.
there's an extra R behind the word. Word R of Warcraft. Right? Simple tricks, which are not easy to detect, especially, something like, for example, World of Warcraft. You would have younger people who are just going there just directly to play, not to stay looking here and there. Right? So it is another problem. Sama, at the end of the day, why would someone, for example, want to stay creating problems with something like Warcraft? What is there to gain by doing all this for a game? What do you think?
In-game currency. Selling
Sorry?
accounts. In-game currency.
Okay.
Selling accounts.
Mhm. They
Uh,
can sell the accounts.
yeah.
What else?
And somewhat link the account to an email address,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
supposedly they use the same email address, and supposedly they use the same password, and he also have a password for his emails and all of his other
Yes.
accounts.
So yes, so obviously one big issue is going to be the user credentials. Okay, so yes, selling accounts is another problem. True, right? Um, but there's also this issue of money. Actually, it is a whole business where you can sell the game currency for actual currency, right? And this, when I was researching on these, you would find um, whole offices in China. I believe they were in China, where you would have people just literally going. Their job was to stay going in user accounts, draining them of their resources and selling them for actual money. And just like people are able to buy the money, to buy for example, the gold of the game, right? They can also sell the gold of the game. Okay, and so it is a business. So whether we like it or not, unfortunately, we don't like it, but it's still a business, right? And certain games are putting in also the two-factor authentication system or three and so on when they're asking for the mobile number, right? So that's why that concept we started off with of the bank has been extended to many places, right? So even certain games, they are recommending that users include their mobile phone. Now the problem is that means that your mobile phone number is running around more databases. Okay, so it's give and take, right? It's give and take, unless you want to keep a mobile only for these things, which you can if you want.
But now
But that means you have to.
now that a lot of new computers have a touch ID, like could that be linked something? Maybe in the future you just put your finger, you like with your touch ID on the phone, it then says it takes your fingerprint. Could that be a thing of the future? Maybe you have I don't know, something that's
Now to do what?
to access any website. I guess if you connect it to the secure, because now every bank app on the phone you just enter with your fingerprint.
Usually, for now, the banks have seen them doing it.
Yeah,
For now, the bank applications they require the fingerprint.
but I think
But there's no reason.
that's a
There's
question
no
of
reason why. There's no reason why other applications will not ask for it. There's no reason because the technology is already there. It's a question of using it now. I mean, smartphones are all with fingerprints, for example.
I know for a fact that if you have a password on, say, your iPhone, and you have a Mac computer, you can use the Touch ID on the Mac computer, and it will also move the password. But that is the password manager of iPhones per se, not the actual application or the thing itself.
Exactly. FM. It's always a bit tricky. It's possible. I think we still have to see quite a lot of these coming around, and now they seem to be gaining a bit more momentum. Basically, even obviously technologies themselves would have advanced a little bit now, right? In fact, our next lesson will be on biometrics. So next lesson we'll be discussing a bit some ideas, some examples of different biometrics. Nala, what do you think? Suppose I have a 3-character password. How many ways are there of finding this password if only small letters are used? Need a calculator? No. Right? If we use capitals or capitals and digits, for example, let me change this thing a bit.
how many letters are in the alphabet. 24. Depends on what alphabet, I guess.
Oh, for the first one. Wait. Oh.
I believe I'm googling how many letters are in the alphabet.
Mm-hmm. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
My Discord somehow has frozen.
Your
Yeah, we
your
don't
stream
have